It's not spinning anymore. It stopped. It's pointing at me. The needle's pointing back the way I came, and I haven't turned around. Don't move. Don't you dare correct for it. Now, before the static clears all the way. My name's Silas Vance. Most folks up this holler just call me Abe, on account of my granddaddy's granddaddy. And I've been carrying that name and these stories both for longer than I care to count. So settle in. Get comfortable. Let the rest of the world go quiet for a bit. And let me tell you about a boy named Caleb Renner and a ridge the old-timers won't name after dark. As a rule, it comes down through the surveying families in this part of the mountains, older than any GPS unit, older than any topo map the Forest Service ever printed. It goes like this. If your compass needle won't settle, if it drifts, swings past true north and keeps on going, points somewhere and then changes its mind, you do not trust it. And you do not, under any circumstance, keep walking by feel. You stop. You sit down right where you are, and you wait for the fog to lift. Most people who hear that rule figure it's about the ore. There's magnetite in these ridges, iron-heavy rock that'll throw a compass needle sideways for true. And any old surveyor around here will tell you that's just physics, nothing haunted about it. That's the story they tell the tourists and the hikers passing through on the trail. It's a good story, because it's mostly true. And mostly true is enough to keep most people careful. But Caleb Renner wasn't most people. Caleb was 26, hired on as a survey assistant for a small outfit doing boundary work up on a ridge the county maps call Widow's Knob, though nobody local calls it that. Local folks just call it the Knob, and they say it the way you'd say a name you didn't much want to say at all. It was late October when Caleb went up there alone, which was his first mistake, though not the one that mattered. His crew chief had gone down the mountain 2 days prior with a bad knee, and rather than wait on a replacement, Caleb figured he could finish the last section of line himself. Just a morning's work. Set the last 2 corner stakes, confirm the bearing, walk it down before dark. The fog came in around 10 that morning, and it came in wrong. That's the word Caleb used later to the men who found him. Not thick like weather. Thick like something had been poured into the hollow and was still settling. He did what you're supposed to do. He'll tell you that, and it's true. When the fog got bad enough he couldn't see the next flagged tree, he took out his compass, and that's when he found the needle wouldn't settle. It swung east. It swung back west. It hung dead still for near a minute like it was thinking something over. And then it swung north-northeast and stayed there, trembling, the way a dog will tremble when it hears something you can't. Caleb sat down. He remembered the rule. He'd been told it by his crew chief, who'd been told it by his own father, who'd surveyed these ridges back in the 70s, and the rule had always come with the same footnote. Magnetite, boys, it's just magnetite. Don't let it spook you. Just sit tight and let it pass. So he sat, and he waited. He told the men later the first hour wasn't so bad. He had a thermos, a little food, and figured a fog that thick couldn't hold past noon. He watched the needle the way you'd watch a kettle, waiting for something to change. It swung slow circles for a while, wide and lazy, then settled a moment on some direction that meant nothing to him, held there trembling, and swung off again. The fog did not lift. Not at noon, and not when the gray light started thinking about going darker, somewhere past 1. Caleb has said the strangest part of that stretch wasn't the compass at all. It was how quiet the woods had gone. No birds, no squirrels working the hickories, just his own breathing, and every so often, off in the white, a sound like a branch settling under its own weight, the kind you'd never notice on an ordinary day, and couldn't stop noticing on that one. An hour went by, then 2. The cold worked into him the way it does up high in late October, starting at the fingers and toes and creeping toward the chest, patient about it, like it had all day. Caleb's hands went stiff around the compass. Still wouldn't settle. Still hung on that same trembling bearing, north-northeast, like it had found something and wasn't going to let go of it. Now here is the part where I want you to slow down with me, because this is the part the rule is really about. It was somewhere in that 3rd hour, with the light going gray and flat, and the cold sitting on his chest like a hand, that Caleb Renner made the mistake his crew chief's father would have told him never to make. He decided he knew better than the needle. He told himself the compass was reading the magnetite, plain and simple, and if it had settled on north-northeast and held there this long, then north-northeast was probably close enough to true. He told himself he could walk that bearing by feel and correct as he went, and he'd be off the ridge and down to the truck before the fog got any worse. That was the mistake. Not being lost, not being cold, trusting the needle's last word instead of sitting with its silence. He stood up. He started walking. And here is where it gets strange. And I want you to understand I am not telling you this the way the county report tells it, because the county report doesn't account for what happened to Caleb's belt buckle. He noticed it maybe 20 minutes into the walk. A small thing. His belt, which had sat comfortable on his hip all morning, started to ride wrong, dragging a little to one side, like the buckle had a weight to it that hadn't been there before. He figured it was just his stance on uneven ground. A belt riding funny is nothing. You walk it off. Then it was his bootlaces, the brass eyelets, the ones that hold the laces through the leather. He felt them tug. Not much, just a small, steady pull, off to the same side his belt had been favoring. Like something out there in the fog had a low, patient hand on every piece of metal he had on him, reeling the line in slow. So slow he'd hardly notice. One small correction at a time. He crouched to check, thinking maybe the laces had come loose on a briar. They were tied fine. Tight, even. He knelt there in the wet leaves with his fingers on the eyelets, and he told the men afterward he could feel it right through the leather. A patient, steady draw, the way a fishing line draws when something far off has taken the bait and hasn't decided yet whether to run. He stood back up and checked the compass again. It had swung. It wasn't pointing north-northeast anymore. It was pointing straight behind him, back the way he'd just come, and it was trembling harder than before, like something had gotten closer and the needle knew it. He almost turned back right then. Some old, quiet part of him, the part that had heard the rules second-hand from a man who'd heard it from his own father, wanted badly to sit back down in the wet leaves and wait, same as before. But it was getting on toward 4 o'clock, and the cold had worked all the way into his chest, and a man who is cold enough will talk himself into almost anything if it means moving instead of sitting still. So he talked himself into it. He told himself the pulling was just his gear settling. Cheap hardware, cold metal, nothing more. He picked a direction he judged roughly downhill, roughly toward the truck, and started walking again, faster now, correcting as he went the way an experienced hand does. Left a little here, straight there. Trust your feet, trust your gut. Get off the mountain. Caleb told the men who found him, and I want to be careful how I say this part, because he was a grown man, not given to fancy, and he said it plain, the way you'd report a fact. He said the compass wasn't malfunctioning at all. He said it had been working the whole time. It just wasn't pointing at true north. It was pointing at whatever was out there in that fog with him. And the closer he walked toward where he thought his bearing should be, the more that thing had come along to meet him halfway. He turned around. That's the part that saved him, or seemed to. He turned to walk back the direction the needle was pointing now, figuring at least it was pointing at something known, the way he'd come, his own boot prints, however faint in the frozen leaf litter. For a while that felt right. His footing steadied. The pulling at his belt and laces eased off some, like whatever had a hand on them had loosened its grip, now that he was headed the direction it wanted. He has said that was the worst part to sit with afterward. Not the fear in the moment, but realizing later how much relief he'd felt. Like a fish feeling the line go slack and mistaking it for freedom. But then his watch band went tight around his wrist, not painfully, just snug, the way a strap cinches when your hands have swollen some in the cold. He tugged it loose, kept walking. A few minutes on, it was snug again. He loosened it again, almost laughing about it. Told himself his wrist was swelling from the cold, same as anybody's. Except it kept getting tighter, in that same slow, patient, one small correction way. And every time he checked it, the band had drawn a little closer to true, pulling toward that same bearing his compass had first locked onto hours before, back when he was still sitting in the wet leaves, believing the rule would hold. He looked down at the compass one more time. The needle had stopped trembling. It had gone dead still, the way it does right before you're about to walk into wherever it's been pointing all along. And it was aimed at a spot in the fog no more than 30, maybe 40 yards off, a spot that looked, to Caleb's eye, exactly like every other gray patch of nothing on that ridge. He started to run. Now, I want to tell you something about running in a fog like that, up on a ridge you don't know, in the dark. You'd think a man could outrun a thing that only moves as slow as a belt buckle dragging or a watch band cinching. And maybe he could have, if running with a kind of thing that could carry a man in a straight line, off and away, clean and simple, the way it does in the stories that end well. But every time Caleb corrected his path, every time his gut told him left when the last pull had been right, or straight ahead when the last pull had been off to one side, he found himself circling. Small at first, adrift he didn't notice, the way you don't notice a canoe drifting on still water until you look up and the bank's not where you left it. Then tighter. He started passing the same split-trunk oak, he swears to it, 3 separate times, each time telling himself it was a different tree that only looked the same in that light, because the alternative was one he wasn't ready to hold on to yet. By the 4th time past that oak, he'd stopped telling himself that. He was not walking away from anything. He understood that now, the way you understand a fact your body already knew before your mind caught up to it. He was walking a spiral, and the spiral was closing. And every choice he made to correct it, left, no, right, no, straight, was only ever a choice about how fast the closing happened, never about whether it happened at all. He has told me, told the men, and it came to me the way most things come to me up here, second-hand and slow, that somewhere in that last circling hour, he stopped bothering to check the compass altogether. Not because he'd stopped being afraid of it, because he'd started to understand that the compass had never been the thing lying to him. The compass had told him true the whole time. He was the one who hadn't wanted to believe it. They found him just before full dark. 2 men from the county search team who'd gone up when he didn't check in by 4. One of them, a fella named Odell Pretty, who'd walked search and rescue on that ridge for near 20 years, said it was the strangest recovery of his career. Not for anything dramatic, but for how close it was. They found Caleb sitting against a boulder maybe 80 yards from his own truck, close enough that he'd have seen its taillight reflectors if the fog had thinned even a little. 80 yards, a 5-minute walk on level ground, and he had spent, by his own reckoning, nearly 6 hours circling within reach of it. He wasn't hurt. He wasn't confused. Not the way you'd expect from a man out that long in that cold. Odell said he looked, more than anything, like a man listening hard for something. He was sitting very still, both hands pressed flat against his own chest, holding his jacket zipper shut with both palms, like he was afraid it might move on its own if he let go. They asked him what happened, and at first he only asked them, quiet, whether either had heard anything on the walk in. They said no. He nodded, like that answer told him something he already suspected. And then he told them about the compass, the belt buckle, the watch band. And then he told them the last thing, the thing that's in the report, but the county doesn't like repeated much, on account of how it unsettles the volunteer search teams. He said that somewhere in that last hour, walking his tightening spiral in the dark, he'd stopped feeling like he was choosing his direction at all. He said it wasn't that something was pulling him. It was that the correcting itself, the little decisions, left, no, straight, no, this way, had started to feel like they were being made for him, somewhere just behind his own thoughts, quiet as a held breath. And he genuinely could not tell you when they found him how long that had been true before he noticed. He kept the jacket zipped tight because he said the pull hadn't stopped, even sitting still, even 80 yards from his truck, in the beam of 2 flashlights and the voices of 2 men he knew. He said the zipper pull was still straining, ever so slightly, toward that same bearing, north-northeast, the same direction the compass had first refused to leave. The county still lists it as a confirmed case of mild exposure and disorientation. Magnetite in the rock, they'll tell you, same as always. Compass drift's a documented hazard on that ridge. Nothing more. But Caleb Renner doesn't hike alone anymore. And I'm told, though I can't swear to who told me first, only that I heard it from someone who'd heard it from someone closer to it than I am, that he still keeps a compass in his truck, not to use, just to watch. And on foggy mornings, before he leaves for work, he checks it first thing, the way another man might check the weather. He says most mornings it points where it ought to. Most mornings. That's the file for tonight. If you're carrying that ridge with you into your own sleep, I hope it settles easier than that needle did. This has been Redacted Archives. You can call me Abe, though the birth certificate still says Silas Vance. And either name will find me if you need to. Rest easy. And if your compass ever won't settle, you sit down. You wait. You don't correct for it.